Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I am Matty K. Stormageddon.
And you're listening to episode 189. And this episode, well, we've got to give it 0 out of 10 for graphics because it's not a video podcast, and that has to go into the final score. But you got to understand, there's context, there's nuance, and yes, it is only a number out of 3. And yeah, graphics is out of 10, but it makes a lot of sense. You need to understand it just a little bit more, okay? Because we're talking about reviews, the way they affect our perception of games, and the way that games are preserved throughout the years. To join us in that, we have actual gaming journalism in the house. We from the FunFactor Podcast, and a number of credits that you can look up by looking them up. We've got Aidan and Ty here. Thank you so much for joining us, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us. This is awesome. We obviously love to talk about games media and reviews, but it's also just great to talk about video games with people we love.
Well, we appreciate that. Aidan is in the works on a side quest episode for the feed, and we got to talking. You'd given me a little sneak peek on FunFactor, and I was like, we talked about gaming magazines way back, but we never dove deep into like the active reviews. Once hearing the first episode that you did where you reviewed a review of Final Fantasy VII, which was excellent. I just love old magazines because the names are wrong. You don't know if they got the Japanese copy, and we'll get into that. But what I've loved about FunFactor and what I like about podcasts like FunFactor is when you have a very specific focus, and that allows you to really drill down on something that I think is worth exploring. I'd love for you both to kind of give the elevator pitch about FunFactor and maybe kind of how you guys came together to create this podcast.
We've been talking about it for a little while, and Aidan and I have been like review partners for each other's work, fiction and nonfiction. He wrote a Hugo Award-winning blog, A Dribble of Ink, about science fiction and fantasy. I was a full-time NFL analyst, and we both wanted to break more into science fiction writing and also help each other out in terms of freelancing and get more bylines. And we discovered how much we had so many similar tastes, especially Chrono Trigger, especially JRPGs. And we talked a lot about game magazines and how thinking critically about media was really shaped and informed by this, and having an analytic approach and scores and rating systems and all that other stuff, but then also evaluating things as art and within their place in culture, and reading the magazines and reading them over and over, right? Because it's the only one you've got for the month, and there's 100 or 200 or 300 pages. Part of it was also, I got hooked on If Books Could Kill, which is a podcast by Michael Hobbs and Peter, I can't remember his last name, but the maintenance phase and You're Wrong About Michael Hobbs, and they read like airport books like Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus and Freakonomics, and they like basically mock them cover to cover, but with a lot of original research to go, this is why this is wrong, this is why this is stupid, this is the source of this dumb thing that everyone believes but is wrong. We wanted to take a little of that energy, but also with that kind of reverence, and go look it back and go, wow, we took all of these things from this. We also probably took a lot that we didn't mean to take, or maybe forgot about, and, expected to, and have been surprised positively and negatively as we go back and look at these old magazines.
That's awesome. I love that. Geoff and I's ethos when creating this podcast was like, we didn't want to do a what's happening in gaming this week podcast because there were a million of those. So we wanted to do something more topic-based, which at the time when we started was less common. There are more of them now. Because we do a topic base, your podcast is literally one of our episode topics blown out to like, what if we looked at one magazine every episode? But like specifically, I want to focus in on where the idea to review a review came from. Is that just wanting to think critically about the act of reviewing?
Yeah, I mean, Ty came up with the concept. I'm a former critic. I was a book critic for a decade and more for my book blog, A Dribble of Ink, but also for Barnes & Noble and Reactor and a whole bunch of other places. And so I sort of have that background in criticism, which is where my interest in Ty's idea when he started pitching this on Discord and back channels like a couple of years ago, that's where my interest peaked. I read dozens and dozens, hundreds of reviews as a kid without even really thinking about how their criticism and how they approach criticism and what it means if you're on an issue of EGM and you have to review 18 games in a month. How did that impact the way that people approached their criticism?
Well, yeah, because certainly when we're reading these magazines as a kid, we see the scores, we see what is said about them, and how we view the journalism of those games, of the reviews, of previews, of everything else is completely skewed by however we view it. In your episode about Chrono Trigger that was released today, as of this recording, talking about codes in magazines where, of course, the companies send them the passwords to put in there. But your idea is, well, they find it the way I find it, by just kind of going crazy on things. And I actually legitimately found a secret that I found printed nowhere in an NES game by doing that.
Ooh.
But MiG-29, there's a way to get all of the weapons in the very first screen. One day it'll be traced back to me because everyone cares about MiG-29, non-official NES game. Regardless, we look at the review scores there as well, and we see them as objective truth, and we don't think about the amount of time that goes into these. And, well, I just got this 80-hour RPG, and I've put 120 hours into it. How does the reviewer not see the fine nuances? They had 12 hours.
Yeah.
The fact that they got as far as they did.
Absolutely. And who's on the review mattered so much.
Yes.
So even within these issues, we'll see sort of contradictions. And one of those examples is in the Chrono Trigger episode that just came out. We're looking at Game Players number 75. And there's a big review of Chrono Trigger. It gets 95%. It's glowing from the main reviewer and the second opinion reviewer. And then a few pages later, there's a review of Yoshi's Island, which I think is like as classic a platformer as Chrono Trigger is a classic RPG. It got a 76%.
Said with the same reverence when people talk about that genre.
Yeah, exactly.
And it basically skirted by as a very good.
Yes, exactly. But you flip earlier in the magazine and there's like the top 10, readers' top 10, and it's full of like, a bunch of Super Nintendo games. And then you get to the editor's top 10 and it's got some PlayStation games, some Saturn games, stuff that hadn't come out yet. They're kind of bragging. But then slotting in at like number 8 or 9 is Yoshi's Island. The game that they gave like a 76, and Chrono Trigger's nowhere to be seen. And so you can see sort of like that subjectivity leaking in even throughout like one issue of this magazine. And that's the sort of stuff that I didn't really recognize or notice 25 years ago. Being in the field now, I look at that and I recognize that these were collective products created by many different people with many opinions who were probably trying to get their own feel for the state of the gaming industry and certain games out there at any given time.
And their voice as a writer as well.
Yes, absolutely.
In listening to your podcast, I started trying to think about like what were the game magazines that, well, most of the gaming magazines I read were at a friend's house. He had a massive collection. But thinking of the highlight ones in my life, and one that I remember grabbing was Game Pro issue 109 that had Final Fantasy VII on the cover. I mean, I was super excited about that. And two things in particular I remember from it was, one, it had sort of retrospective reviews on Final Fantasy at the time 2 and 3 on the SNES. They gave Final Fantasy 2 perfect scores across the board, 5 out of 5 in all 4 categories. Final Fantasy 6 they did not. I think it was FunFactor and one of the others they gave 4.5. And I remember I didn't have an SNES. I went from NES to PlayStation, but a lot of my friends had RPGs on the SNES. And I feel like I would have gotten a very different opinion from them on those things. And the other was noticing there and then getting other Game Pros later, I was starting to notice the writers that were more constantly negative. And they wrote under pseudonyms with little icons for each of them. And I think Boba Fett was the writer that I would most notice. Okay, this game got trashed. Boba Fett wrote the review. Okay.
Yeah, you definitely sort of had those heels, right? Who would kind of take that on. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And you get those little viewpoints of it, but it still is basically cartoon characters in my child brain.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things like growing up, like you say on the show, like you assume as a kid reading these reviews, it's law, it's objective. I used to write music reviews. I've gotten back into for our Patreon writing game reviews. It's really fun to flex that muscle and figure out what I'm going to bring to it. And I decided to give them number scores, which like, that's a whole other thing. For me, it made sense in my framework, but I also say very much that it's coming from me. I talk in the first person in my reviews because I don't ever want the illusion that I'm quote unquote objective. If you're coming to our Patreon to read a free review that I wrote for our audience, you want to know what I think of the game, not what the game is. But as a kid, it was like, oh no, you have to be objective, right? You have to be impartial. You have to judge this game just on its merit. And now as an adult and having interacted with tons of games journalists and creators, it's like, oh no, nobody was objective. Everyone was subjective. You brought your experience to the review. It's why I think the culture still kind of leans on that, right? Like the general public still thinks, oh, this is an objective review by so-and-so because they're the authority. But that's not the case, right? And I think it's only in the modern era we see more of that openness about the subjectivity, right? People writing from that perspective and being really open about it and not trying to claim to be the source. I think you guys were talking about in the first episode, like several reviews that was just like, this felt like the law. This was the law of the land.
Yeah.
In reality, coming back to it, you're like, no, what the hell was I thinking? There's no law here. It's clearly peppered with their thoughts and perspectives.
Yeah, and especially sort of the artifice of the score, where adding layers to it made it seem more authoritative. And, we talked about that game players that introduced, it's this weighted average, where to emphasize our values on gameplay, that's going to count 6 times this other and this is a factor of 1x and this is a factor of 2x, and these scales 1 to 10, and then they come out with this number and anything 90% or above gets their ultimate award. And it's like, okay, I said on the episode, there were times as a kid when I remember feeling like, this feels like you gave a game that probably deserved an ultimate in 89 because you didn't want to give it that, or you went through the numbers and went, let's nudge this up one so the math works out, right? Or like with Yoshi's Island, where we talked about that versus Bug, another platformer side-scroller nobody remembers, was like a 74, and Yoshi's Island was a 76, and then that was the difference between a good and a very good.
Yeah, an SNES game over a Saturn game even, so that's
right.
Wild.
Yeah, so it's like, again, there's this sheen of objectivity, and in our first episode of the PSM #1, they're the unofficial PlayStation magazine, very important, unofficial PlayStation magazine. They are biased just because they only cover one system and are dependent upon advertisers and the audience of one system does not mean that they're not going to tell you the truth, what they really think about these games. And editor Chris Slate went on to edit Nintendo Power and then cross the table and become chief communications for Nintendo. So it's like this sheen of objectivity, and what we really wanted was trust, right? We used objectivity to mean, I want to believe these people when they say the things they're saying about these games. I want to believe this is what they really feel. And when we look at stuff like, not to jump too far ahead, but, Metacritic, where you go, okay, well, give me every score 1 to 100, and then we'll average it. And then that's objective reality. Well, no, you're still putting a bunch of different subjective opinions into a blender. And a lot of the smartest and most interesting people who have the most trust and credibility on these games are not included because they stopped giving review scores because they were sick of trying to hammer either their work or the way we talk about it into the shape of that score.
It's a bias that I don't even have a name for. There is the editorial intent, how we want to present these things, even if you're not covering just one console, either between you don't have a lot of time to review it, or you're not much for the genre. A story that I often come back to in thinking about game reviews is our associate producer, Sarah, is a pinball fiend. We found at a convention Mario Pinball Land for the Game Boy Advance. I remember there being a review for this on IGN that was not too kind, and we looked it up because, age of smartphones, and it was a 5 out of 10. Sarah's like, okay, why was it bad though? I gotta know why it's bad. She starts reading it, and I'm just chatting with the person behind the table, and Sarah just all of a sudden goes, oh, we're buying this. This guy just sucks at pinball. And because I've told this story a number of times, she has filled in the blanks. So she's reading things like, you've got to be able to aim the ball at specific targets, and it's really challenging. Yeah, buddy. That's how pinball works.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Even if you aren't looking at game reviews with an eye towards criticism of criticism, there's times there where you just kind of go, this wasn't a good fit. So rarely do those become teachable or learning moments of, okay, now how are we going to take this fun lesson of media literacy into the next game review we read? Do we all need to get the new Borderlands immediately? Is it that good? Maybe. But let's find out.
Yeah. I mean, I think that what's really funny about that is I mentioned earlier that I'm starting to give scores, and whether that sticks or not, who knows? But also 50 people are reading, not thousands of people. So I'm not that worried about it. I think what's funny about the reviewers reviewing stuff that they don't like or aren't good at is back then, especially in the magazine days, you had to justify the print, you had to justify the cost, you had to have everybody doing everything all hands on deck. I happen to be very close with a lot of members of the Game Informer crew who have luckily come back recently, which is very exciting. I'm really happy for all of them. I know that that was a skeletal team making one of the best gaming magazines in print and will continue to do so. And I'm very excited. But like, I always thought it's like hundreds of people running around doing their thing. And it's just not. And like, you have to justify every step. It's why I think more nuanced reviews couldn't exist then like they can now, especially with video essays and podcasts and other things, because you had to justify the mainstream costs. And like, there were quote unquote indie games probably since the dawn of games, smaller companies making games. But to get that to an audience, it's like, well, I'm not going to review this unknown, unregistered Nintendo cartridge because who cares? I'm going to review this big shiny thing, right? Because that'll get people to buy the magazine. You put the big game on the cover. Like, I'm grateful that now games like Hades and the like can become these giant breakout hits because they can get the focus. I like that you guys attack the review of the review and going, we're bringing the knowledge we have now to this thing. We're not going to criticize them for their gaps, but we're going to point them out and laugh at them, like the lack of innovation in Chrono Trigger, which is ludicrous.
And like, one of the things that dropped Yoshi's Island down to a 76 is they gave it a 5 out of 10 on graphics and said it looked like a baby's game or whatever. And it's
Absurd.
like, like, again, subjective opinion. They didn't like it.
We all felt bad about what we said about Wind Waker, okay?
Yeah, right? Also, contextually, we understand, like, if you lived through that transition from the 16-bit to the 32-bit era, there was so much emphasis on 3D graphics and how those were just making pixel art obsolete. But, like, Yoshi's Island is a gorgeous game, and it does so many technically impressive graphical tricks. Objectively, it's got to be more than a 5 out of 10 because it was pushing that hardware so hard and doing things other games were not doing graphically.
And this speaks to a weird subjective idea of an objective truth.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not doing cutting edge graphics as I think of cutting edge graphics, even though it was.
Exactly.
And it's not talking of design. And thus we get this.
Exactly. And then the flip side of that is I'll often notice that, like, in really positive reviews. So in PSM #1, they do Final Fantasy VII. And what will often happen, and this is a problem with criticism, period, all over the place, especially in like community-driven platforms like Goodreads or Amazon Reviews, book blogs. I notice it a lot. They'll write a really glowing review of something like Final Fantasy VII, but then there's that editor on your shoulder saying, "Oh, but you need to be objective," and so they'll write a review, and then the last 5% of the review is this like negative, like, "Oh, it's really great, but the music quality in Final Fantasy VII isn't very good," whatever. So like, they'll end with some negative opinion to try to balance out 75%, 80% of the review being so glowing. And then they'll just do a little wrap up, a little kicker paragraph to wrap up and close it. And that leaves unintentionally the reader with a negative impression of that game. You spend all this time trying to talk about how great it is, but you want to be objective. You put in the little bit of negativity and criticism at the end instead of contextualizing it against the other parts that you're praising. And that has a subtle effect on how people leave that review and what they feel. And that's the type of stuff that, I've learned over 20 years as a critic that I would love to be able to go back and see how applying sort of modern criticism to these older games, what would that look like? How do we take what we learned or what we experienced back then and then just make us better writers and better fans and players and creators down the road?
Yeah. One of the things that I always appreciate about games as a medium, and I always have from, Milk Money days, is the idea of we won't watch a film that is 6 hours long, typically. You don't go to the movies to watch that unless it is something special, something specific, whatever else. On average, like, the 75 to 150 minute range. Let's go. We figure that out. Games don't have to abide by that. There's a much more open field for not just playtime, but that's one aspect of it, and one that I think of in certainly a period of time in game development and games journalism that was a huge factor in how games were scored with these law-like objective numbers to them. This game is amazing. You'll finish it in 5 hours, 4 out of 10.
Right.
Taking a singular objective lens and trying to apply it to the whole width and breadth of games development and game releases and what that reveals about us and what that reveals about how we're feeling about things at the time. And there's only been more games released faster these days. I mean, you could kind of get away with a once-a-month game magazine when indie development wasn't a big thing, when Nintendo was only allowing a company to release 5 cartridges a year, so they were having to create dummy companies to release more of them. We all knew Ultra Games was just Konami, but we wanted the games. And it's funny to see what shifts in terms of getting enough of those out there. I mean, listening to FunFactor made me remember that it wasn't just the cover story review and like the 5 or 6 other things that would basically be on the pack-in demo disc level of what's going on. But there were lots of little capsule reviews, short reviews, pieces therein. And to your point, Aidan, about the fact that if you write a long review, you almost have to put the negative stuff in there and like temper that. But if you've got just a paragraph, you've got to give the shape of it. Like good, bad, and different, you can't go into detail. It's like controls are smooth, graphics are basic, lots of fun. Go for it. And I feel those were more successful in getting me to go for a game.
Yeah, and I think like that's where something like EGM or GameFan sort of hit on something where they would have their capsule reviews across multiple reviewers. So everybody, the review crew in EGM, would review all the games. And that alone kind of highlighted the idea that like personal experience matters. Your tastes matter, and that's going to inform the way that you react to this game. There is no objectivity here. This is 3 or 4 people playing the same game. Their opinions differ. You'd get a 10 and you'd get a 7.5 in the same game, in the same issue of EGM. And that sort of highlighting that personal experience is part of the entire thing that we bring to games is really important. And I think laid the foundation for what Ziff Davis and 1UP and EGM sort of did in the early aughts when they really got behind the idea of like personality driven criticism. Really leaned into the idea that we would have our favorite reviewers or our favorite people who we aligned with on taste. And I wasn't necessarily looking to them to be like, oh, what did they think of my favorite game or the game I'm excited about? It's what game are they talking about that I didn't even know existed? And because they're talking about it, now I'm excited. You know, like I'm playing Blueprints right now. Mm-hmm. I've been playing it for a week or so. I didn't even know it existed 10 days ago. But I saw Jason Schreier and a few other people on Blue Sky sort of hinting at how good this game is. And I was like, I didn't know this game existed, but Jason has very similar taste to me. If he's like raving about it, I want to know what's up. And so I reached out to PR and got a copy of it. It's incredible. It's like, it's so much more than I ever would have expected. And all of a sudden I'm putting it in, you know, Rarefied Air alongside Outer Wilds and Return of the Obra Dinn, which are games like I never really thought I would be able to lump a third title in with. And that happened because somebody who I have spent a lot of time reading and talking to liked this game and was talking about it from that subjective perspective of saying, hey, this game has got the juice and it's like, it's working for me. And I think you guys are going to like it. And I think being able to create that connection, even way back in the 90s, I knew which of the reviewers were my favorites. And I would open an issue. And if I saw so-and-so on a review of a game I was looking forward to, I was like, you know, I'd grown. And I think that was that start of that personality-based criticism and games journalism that really took over. And then eventually kind of spawned into the influencer-focused media that we've got now. But I can see the beginnings of it. And I think video games in particular were really ahead of the curve in terms of trying to get to that human-to-human aspect of criticism and writing about culture.
Yeah, it's interesting to look at older magazines and see, you know, the editorial staff, the senior members of a magazine. Man, they're 25 years old. They're so mature. So video games as a medium had to prove that we had our wisdom teeth pretty quickly and pretty hard. And I think that need to do it meant certain pushes. You didn't necessarily have to convince big money, but you did. But as far as the readers go, there's a little bit more of like, hey, we're also not much older than you, if at all. So that, I think, contributed, to that idea of the being ahead of the curve on the personality. And however I may feel about influencer culture, I do think that the personality-based media review is so great, so important. Certainly speaking as a gaming podcaster, like I found out about Blueprints a few days ago from friends, from Matt, from other people, and I'm excited to try it out when I get my hands on it. Some of my favorite games have been recommendations on a personal level of someone going, Geoff, hold out your hand. You're playing this. Do it. gaming magazines, whether digital or physical, can't do that to us. But having that connection is the best way I can think of right now that we're able to do that. Far more than, the ads that are the other pages of the magazine.
And I think going back to the 90s, you're right that video games were new. Millennials and younger Gen X are the first people who grew up with video games just in our life. They've always existed. We've always known a world with video games. It was sort of those younger Gen X writing for those older millennials in these magazines at the time. And it felt special. It felt like we were in on something. The people who are writing these magazines, I connect with them now on Blue Sky or social media or wherever we have them on our podcast. And now that we're in our 40s, we're the same age.
Yes.
They seemed so much older than us at the time. But, I've been talking to Chris Johnston, who worked on a bunch of Ziff stuff. He's not much older than I am. And, that time compresses as we all get older. But I think that it is really important to recognize that these games were, and the criticism, we didn't have the language to write good criticism of video games at the time because video games were new. We didn't have generations to look back on. Can you imagine being a film critic when movies were new? How do you even review that train coming at you,
Right.
Back in the day, right? We didn't have the language for film. I can't even conceptualize the idea of mediums being created, but that's what happened with video games. And so of course we'll evolve.
Yeah. Something that we've been coming into a lot and encountering is this kind of switch of what are the pressures financially, right? Because as we've been talking about a lot lately, inflationary pressures, what were we paying for these games then? And I talk about it all the time. I saved up lawn mowing money. I paid $85 for my copy of Chrono Trigger in 1995, which is literally 170. It's double, it's more than double, well more than double what the game actually cost. And so it's okay, that's outrageous. So before making that investment, I had to sit there with all these game magazines and go, okay, this. And I remember making, basically spreadsheets on notebook paper being okay, I could buy Earthworm Jim. I could buy the new Madden. And I'm doing the same thing. I'm literally taking multiple magazines and I'm looking, well, I like this graphic. Oh, but replay value is important because this is the only game I'm going to be able to buy before Christmas, which is when I'm going to get my free games that I don't have to pay for. Right. And that was so huge. That was paramount. And so these reviews are kind of coming from this place of you got to prove it's worth your money. And so you have to be objective. So we have to know this, you have to establish that trust. And now it's flipped around to where, if you're an independent critic or an influencer in that kind of weird personality driven space, that is where it's so important where, okay, Aidan and I just recorded our first bonus episode with Mike Drucker, comedy writer, and he brought up Thank Goodness You're Here. There's a little game, brilliantly put together, had a huge impact on everybody who plays it. Very short experience. It's nothing okay, AAA, put it in the Metacritic grinder. What score does it get, right? You can't even communicate what makes that special in that paradigm, right? It doesn't even make sense. Personality driven, great. Okay, what if I find out big, Thank Goodness You're Here, is lining Mike Drucker's pockets, right? What if I, then it's kind of whoa, hey, wait a minute. And that's a calculus I feel younger folks are only even beginning to discover. Aidan and I talk about, and we haven't talked about this on the podcast yet because we haven't done a Nintendo Power episode yet, really.
Right. Yeah.
There is that level of okay, you look at these scores and you kind of go, but is it? And especially it was even with the NES was the only game in town. You still felt that way. And then it was NES versus Sega. You're going, okay, but it is very clearly in your best interest to pretend every Nintendo game is better than it is, right? And even if you're mostly trying to keep it plausibly deniable that you're independent on this, I know deep down if this game sucks, you're not going to tell me. And if this game rocks, I'm going to question if you're telling the truth. And we don't have that connection, right? So it's this back and forth between where's the money coming from? Who are they beholden to? And what engendered the trust? And ultimately, it's got to be the quality of the work. It's people putting out their critique and then the audience having that and going, yes, this sings, this matches. I playing the game, and even if I'm not having the same experience and the same subjective feelings, I see where that perspective came from.
I enjoy that you guys talk about the inflationary aspect of what games cost when we were younger. And it wasn't just a matter of there were fewer games, or those of us in our age bracket, we were kids and couldn't buy as many games as we wanted to. the dollar meant more for it. It was a much more pricey endeavor, which kind of for me right now is really a wild moment of, the console wars make a lot more sense there when you are digging your heels in on whatever console you have. Like, the household that could afford a Super NES and a Sega Genesis was, deluxe. In kind of looking back on older magazines and taking this critical eye towards criticism, for the single platform Daddy keeps the lights on for us kind of magazines, do you notice a little bit of, when they say this, they kind of mean this is their way of being nice. This is the kind aunt saying it sucks.
You see that a little bit, but I think those magazines were focused on being positive. But they didn't read like propaganda at the same time. Like, Nintendo Power felt more like a marketing product than something like PSM or OPM. But even then, I think almost every experience had value to some people. Like, there are lots of bad games that I have fond memories of.
Oh, yeah.
I've written also for websites. I wrote for the Barnes & Noble science fiction fantasy blog for a long time, and I had free reign. I could write about whatever I wanted. But the idea was, we just need to be coming at this from a positive angle. Like, we need to sell the book. You're not writing a sales pitch. But if you have a story to tell, we want it to come at it from some sort of positive angle that people are going to feel excited about this. I've written for the Epic Game Store. Like, some of my favorite things I've ever written was provided that platform because Epic Games, they want to sell copies of those games. And they say, like, go write a really enthusiastic, exciting story about these games. And I said, yeah, I can absolutely do that. I'm not even like a big Final Fantasy 16 fan. I love Rebirth. 16 is not my favorite, but there were so many angles there that I was like, yeah, like, if I get access to the creative team, like, I can write a great, enthusiastic reported feature about this game completely genuinely. Like, there was nothing was impacted or influenced by the fact that this was, like a corporate backed site. I wrote exactly the same piece I would have written for Polygon or for Kotaku or for wherever. And so when I look at these old magazines, I think that's probably the calculus going on. Where you're saying, okay, this game's not great, but how can we come at it from a positive angle? Are there going to be jokes about cartridges costing a lot of money? Or how many CDs you can buy or whatever? Yeah, they're obviously going to start taking digs. They're probably going to take ads in their magazine that wouldn't appear in EGM, because Nintendo would be like, well, that's kind of taking a dig at us for not having CDs. So we don't want it running in a magazine inside our big ad for Mario. We're going to pull our ad. You see the subtle signs there, but I think it was probably also a lot of editorial intent in terms of, like, let's just get people excited and feeling good about video games and feeling excited about the things that they're going to be experiencing. I don't think it was disingenuous. I don't think there was malice behind any of that either.
Yeah, no, and I think as a writer, there's sort of a language, and it's very funny because every culture has its own turns of phrase, weird little things and ticks that get used and reused, and you come to understand it as a kind of dialect, right?
Yes.
It's very funny. I cropped one time. I was at the dentist office and reading a copy of Off-Road magazine, and it was reviewing this set of like 3-foot shocks for some Ford Bronco frame or whatever. And it was talking about the articulation and something. And I was really into audio stuff at the time. And I like posted it on an audiophile blog. I'm like, hey, what audiophile magazine is this from? Oh, sorry, it's Off-Roader. This is about lifting giant trucks. So you do get the kind of glossing over, and you don't get the superlatives, right? Oh, fantastic animation, blah, blah, blah. And it's got the expected control from you'd expect from a platformer. Okay, so it doesn't have great control, right? That sort of thing. Or for fans of the genre, this is certainly one of those.
Which is actually a good thing to say for the review, but also is
kind of a signal, or even a game that this is a huge title for this platform. It's going to have to get 8, 9, 10. It's going to have to get 4.5, 5. It'll be like, 5, 5, 5, 4, 5. And the 4 is graphics, or the 4 is sound, or the 4 is gameplay. And you kind of go, I bet that's more like a 2.5 or 3 or something like that. You can kind of see where the weak link is. But then at the same time, publishing deadlines that we're aware of now, turnaround times, those sorts of things. It's really interesting to go back and see what kind of made it through at the time and then what didn't. Like something I was kind of expecting to see or hoping to see as I was looking back on Final Fantasy VII reviews was kind of a discussion of, for me and my friends, we kind of got to the end of Final Fantasy VII and went, this as a game is not as good as 6 was, right? Like this as a story beginning to end certainly isn't as coherent. Not to say that 6 didn't lose its way in the second half either, right? Like,
But it did it in much more intentionally than it felt like 7 did.
yes, right. So you sit there and go, I was like, oh, I was hoping to see some of that. And instead, I saw some, that when people talk about drawbacks, there was stuff I didn't expect. That we went into it with, okay, they used synthesized audio instead of Redbook. So like that was one thing. Then other reviewers pointed out, hey, Barrett's dialogue is stereotypical. This guy's a walking stereotype. And it's like, okay, that's the kind of stuff that I didn't expect to see. That's the kind of stuff that my memory glossed over. And then we go back and tell ourselves, revisionist, oh, they weren't aware of this then. Well, yeah, they were, right?
Yeah.
And so that kind of stuff has been what's really interesting to me, is finding the stuff that we kind of let memory elide, but then also getting back into that dialogue and getting back into that language space and going, oh, right. This is how we talk about things when we can't talk about things.
And it is very funny to think about, like, yeah, I don't know if I'd want Final Fantasy VII with Redbook audio. Yet again, one of those things where we were blinded by the technology and not the sustainability.
Right.
Well, it's like Aidan said earlier, how everyone was flaunting polygonal graphics because it was the future and that sprites are the past and they're obsolete. Whereas the general consensus now is that a lot of PlayStation games aged like milk, but all the pixel art games look phenomenal. But it's the new hotness. I also like the comment about numbers. As someone who has admitted to start using that archaic system for their own reviews, I ran into a wall last year because one of the games that I really loved last year, though I didn't finish it till January, was the new Star Wars game, Outlaws. But it got 7s and 8s, mostly 7s across the board. And that is a whole other issue that everyone's like, oh, it's a 7, it's a bad game. 7's not a bad game. Not everything has to be perfect. And like, I am glad I went back and finished it in January because I had fallen off of it, because I loved the story. I thought it was great. Yes, the stealth mechanics were imperfect and the combat was imperfect, but the narrative was incredible. The design was incredible. The graphics were gorgeous. The writing was really fun. That kind of nuance, also talking to the time frame, there is not a doubt in my mind that some of those reviews were because someone got a code a week, maybe 2 before it came out, and then had to condense the playthrough to get the review up. Whereas I took 6 months plus to finish it and loved it because I could take my time. And I was lucky enough to get a code. I'm part of the Ubisoft Creators Program, and like, I didn't pay $1 for it. And so I didn't have to say anything about it, but I was still praising what I liked, criticizing what I didn't. But I also, like I said, could take my time. And I think it's really fascinating to look back on those reviews because you don't really know who is coming at it from a place of like, I took my time with it. Some reviewers didn't finish the game, and you didn't always have to, right? And there's no requirement to. We want to have that kind of complete perspective, but like, it's interesting to me that we have so much more access to how people got the code, when they got it, how long they say in the review, how long they had to play it, how many hours they played. But I think part of it is a defense mechanism because of that unknown. I think about one of my favorite reviewers, Patrick Klepek, who is mostly a podcaster now, but has done some incredible journalism. I'm playing Assassin's Creed Shadows right now. I haven't finished an Assassin's Creed game since the Ezio trilogy. I haven't played one since Origins, and I didn't get very far after I saw the map and 1,000 symbols and went, I'm good. I'm done. I don't want to play. But he came on Remap and went, so I haven't played Assassin's Creed in a while, but I'm really hooked on this, and this is why, and I got invested, and I went, well, I trust Patrick. And I don't always agree with Patrick, Lord no, but I adore his work, and so the minute he said, I'm interested, and I have that experience that he didn't know Matt, also had of, I haven't played one in a while, I went, well, I guess I'll try it, and I'm in love with it right now. I think it's great. I think that kind of face value honesty now is so important. And I think the personality-driven stuff kind of has to have that. Like Aidan was saying, there's a level of trust that you just have to have if you want the reader to take you seriously. You can't boldface lie about stuff that's in or isn't in the game, because then you lose that trust from the audience. You have to, at some point, be kind of face value about it, or it can get lost in the sauce.
I think like one of the other big variables here is the connection between not just critics and the readers is direct now, right? And there's the implications of like what a critic or a writer or a games journalist owes to their readers. But the connection is also like direct between publishers and gamers now, and fans and the people with purchasing power. I also bought Assassin's Creed Shadows. I have not played one in the series since Assassin's Creed and Assassin's Creed 2, neither of which I liked very much. But I jumped in with Shadows. I like feudal Japan. It looks cool. I bought Assassin's Creed Shadows because Ubisoft was trolling Elon on Twitter. Like, they were dogging him on Twitter. And I was like, I got to buy this game now. Like, because I think it looks like I might enjoy it. But because I also want to support that sort of thing. And that's the sort of like direct connection between publishers and the shift for brands to sort of take on personalities on social media and on social media spaces, trying to get in between the critics and the people buying the games and get to them first. And this was one where Ubisoft got to me first. And if I had gone through and heard Klepek and heard other people, Aftermath wrote a great piece about Shadows. And I was reading that and I was like, oh, you know what? I actually do think like I will like this game just as a game. And so that critical piece was there, but Ubisoft got to me first and they did it in a funny way and got me to put my money out. And then what I think it was Chris at Aftermath did was make me go from, oh, I'm going to just like kind of add this to my collection. I'll get to it whenever I try to mess around with it, to, oh, I'm installing this like today and I'm going to play it. And then I ended up spending, time messing around with it before Blueprints came out. And I think that ecosystem of having competition for people's time, but also people's attention, and having critics and journalists fighting directly with publishers for that is really hard.
Yeah. Getting the context from old reviews, seeing what people were paying attention to, what we have glossed over, both for good or for ill, in the tides of memory and experience. And, there are now 10-year-olds that are playing Final Fantasy VII PS1 style that love it. I don't know how many, but I'm sure there's a few. We have always been weirdos.
Yes.
I thought we got better about rumor milling. Now I have an 8-year-old nephew, and I just realized folk have always been folk. But
1000%.
I love it. But the thing is, with a lot of game collections that are happening now, I love some of the Digital Eclipse stuff that's kind of holding on to clippings and newsreels and bits and pieces about the games coming out. This is just a question to us all, to the four of us here and to anyone listening. I think it's important to hold on to old reviews like this, especially published ones. These are sources to pull from. What are the best ways to hold on to these as context for our history and for the media and medium that we love so much?
I mean, Video Game History Foundation is doing amazing work in terms of preserving gaming ephemera, and they're focused specifically on stuff like magazines, manuals, like all of that sort of stuff, trade show paraphernalia.
They're the reason I knew which Game Pro I was going to be talking about earlier this episode.
And they launched this digital archive of theirs just before we started recording the show. It's been invaluable for us, but it has so much room to grow. The number one thing, I think, supporting Video Game History Foundation and what they're doing, other organizations, other archival organizations are really important. But also, I think as we create new criticism, new works about video games, is making sure that we reference and understand and contextualize the past. My upcoming book is on Suikoden 1 and 2. I wrote a book about the history of Japanese RPGs, going into the archives of content that isn't altered by, hindsight is so important. And so we can talk to people about what they think of Suikoden now, or what they thought of, Final Fantasy when it came out. But being able to go back in time and look at interviews with the creators as they were working on these games in 1990, and then compare that against criticism that was happening when those games came out, is really important. We look at something like Suikoden or Castlevania Symphony of the Night, those early PlayStation sprite games. We talk about how the PlayStation was all about 3D graphics, the rumor that Bernie Stolar wouldn't allow 2D games to come out. Everybody thought they were lame. You look in PSM issue number 1, like they have a big spread on Castlevania, a big preview of Castlevania, and they say, like, you know what? Don't discount this because it's a pixel art game. This is better than anything else on the platform. They have Suikoden as like the number 6 in their top 25 best PlayStation games. You look at these magazines, and even at the time, they were recognizing these great classic games for what they were. And it's important that we don't forget that. And so as long as we're archiving that, but also referencing that when we're talking about these games and these series and these points in history, and not letting it be rewritten not letting that narrative of 2D games, Pixar games, are never given a chance on the PlayStation. And it shows that there was a huge diversity of opinion on the matter. There were people at those magazines that were probably begging to get on the Castlevania Symphony of the Night preview because they wanted to be the one that was like, hey, don't ignore this. Like, yeah, it doesn't look as good as Gex 2 or Bug, but like, but it's great. Play it anyway. Whereas 30 years later, we're like, well, like, it's a stone cold classic, quote unquote. Everybody knows that. But there were people there at the time who were fighting for that. And if we lose that context, then you just sort of get the apocryphal stories of what history was like taking over, and that doesn't really help anybody.
I think personal stories are key to a lot of this, especially. Like, Geoff and I do console retrospectives on the show, and since the first one we did, we had a guest. And part of it is I just like to feature other voices, but part of it is also, first of all, Geoff and I haven't played every console. Lord knows we've tried, but there are gaps. We just did our N64 episode most recently, and it was 4 nerds on a call who all had some level of experience, whether we got it at launch, whether we got it when we were older. There was a literal baby on the call because he was like 15 years younger than us. And he's like, it was the first game I got, a console I got as a kid. It's like, But like all of those varieties of narratives enrich why we love these games. And I think it's very easy for me to say the true fact that Chrono Trigger is the best game ever made and is definitely the best RPG ever made.
Indisputable and objective.
Correct.
No arguments here.
Not on this call, at least. But a friend of mine streamed it for the first time, I think last year, the year before. He had never played it before. And I got to watch him experience the court scene for the first time and got about like the food and the cat. That kind of stuff, I think, having context and not having context, but knowing something and the history. Like, I know he played it because everyone says, but also a lot of his close friends said, you have to play this game. It's one of the best RPGs ever made. I love that kind of personal context and celebration of games. That is definitely in some reviews, but I feel like it's more in the personality pieces. But those personality pieces, like you're saying, Aidan, don't come to exist if you don't have that history to look back on, right? One can't exist without the other.
Yeah. A big core thesis in my book, Fight Magic Items, is I wanted to tell the story of Japanese RPGs and their journey to the West. There are too many games to talk about. And so I had to focus, right? I had to focus on Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest, even though there was stuff like Black Onyx that probably, needs to be told in the whole story. I had a certain word count that I was allowed to write for the publisher. They said it. I blew past it by 60% anyway.
As one should.
Yeah, exactly. I had to pick and choose, right? I couldn't fit everything. And so I had to pick a story that I could tell the best way that I could. The core kind of theme going through the book, though, is like, just because we didn't play the same games or have the same experiences, we felt the same emotions. And they might have come from different places. Journeys we went on would have mirrored each other, even if we didn't have exact circumstances. And I think that that's really important, is to recognize that everybody's experience through the history of games has the same kind of relevance. Everybody has experienced games in their own personal way, and none of those are better or worse or more or less valuable than any other. And so looking back on this old media allows us to see that those individual experiences, those collective experiences, as you got a group of writers together to create a magazine, they were there and they existed within the context of their own sort of existence. And that created something unique in and of itself. Every time somebody plays Final Fantasy VII, that's like a unique experience that's never happened before. Even if the game itself exists, every issue of PSM was a unique experience that couldn't have existed except with that specific group of people playing those specific games. I mean, this just goes back, I think, to a fundamental truth about humanity, which is like we need to continue to honor everything that has gone into creating this point. Preserving media, whether it's games media or it's indigenous stories from where you live, right? Like, I work for a museum in my day job, and a big part of what we do is learning how we can be better stewards for the stories of the people who live in this part of the world. And a big part of that is recognizing that every story and experience has value. And I think that's what we want to mine on the podcast. We want to go back and see what sort of history, what stories exist in these magazines that have been forgotten, and bring those forward. What have been misremembered? And then also, how did those experiences shape the way we tell stories now? And is that good? Is that bad? Is it a little bit of both? How can we learn from the way we talked about video games 30 years ago so we can be better at it now?
Yeah. And I think, too, the notion of the physical artifacts and the physical objects, and we come at those from different spaces just as much,
Yes.
museum and curation work is for media as well. The RPG experience in Japan in the 80s was very different than the Western experience with Japanese RPGs because of the other RPGs we had. The D&D derivative PC RPGs that were being shipped back and forth to each other like messages in a bottle that we were then building towers from sketches. Truly incredible and insane. On the flip side of things, one of the other things that listening to the Chrono Trigger episode today was it got me also looking at another early issue that I could remember in my mind. I couldn't remember which one it was. Video Game History Foundation saved me here. Official PlayStation Magazine, issue 11, Metal Gear Solid on the cover. This was the first time I'd heard of Metal Gear Solid. I'd played Metal Gear on the NES, and this was like, oh my God, they're making another hot diggity shit. And it was amazing. And so it was so fun to look through that again. See how little they knew about Metal Gear Solid. Reading that is absolutely we've got pictures, we've got some names. So we think this guy's doing this. They've got every character. They correctly identify the characters, but saying their role or their relationship to Snake is bananas. It's great. And I love that too. I'm a big fan of demo discs because I love the snapshots of where the games are. And the other thing was looking at it and seeing the advertisements. Okay, Thrill Kill is a hell of a story of a canceled game and of the attitude era of so much and the excess and all those things that we look back on and go, wow, yeah, no, this is 12-year-old as hell. This is Rob Liefeld shit right here.
Yes.
And to see it and see other previews that were written about this game that never came to be, that if you know about it, you know many reasons why it didn't come to be, but to also see how it stands amongst other ads that aren't necessarily as remembered. Some good, some bad, some just really take you somewhere. They are also as much part of the story and as much. Some of these, I could not have told you the game, but as soon as I saw the ad, I was like, yes, the one where they're tattooing that on the person's head kind of thing. It's like, well, obviously. Of course it is. And we need those stories too.
Yeah. And we've had so many times where it's I couldn't have said, on a bet. Name this game, name this preview. I flip the page and I see the image and instantly boom, oh yes, that's right, I remember this. But I think having that objective reality to remind us of, the stuff that our memory elides, that it skipped over, to refresh and go, oh yeah, that's right, that's it. Or, oh wait, I mixed those two things up or whatever. That's so huge. And that's a big part of why we go back and do this. But then it's also, when we're talking about connecting our personalities and the stories, a big part of it comes back for me of watching history get told. I'm 43. My kids are 20, 19, and about to turn 17. I've raised them with a lot of the same stuff that I had, and I've been connected. I've stayed young by connecting with their media and watching their media with them, right? And we're constantly in dialogue with each other. And so seeing narratives propagate down, we talk about Aidan and I all the time, see, TikTok stuff, YouTube stuff where, today's 23-year-olds talking to 14-year-olds are like, oh, well, back in the 90s, it was this. You go, well, okay, no, it wasn't. Or it was for 60% of the people, but 40% of the people were very strongly feeling the opposite, and how much of, like I said, Final Fantasy VII, what is the narrative of Final Fantasy VII? How do we remember that? How is that calcified? And we talked about in the Chrono Trigger episode, it is wild, any group of 4 retro game podcasters, they might all think Chrono Trigger is the best RPG ever, right? There's some pretty hefty percentage that settled on that. How much was that at the time? Because at the time, I felt like kind of a hipster, right? I felt like this, yes, people liked this game, but it was a pretty small group. And then I go back through, okay, it was 95. They give it a 95 out of 100. There's 8 2-page ad spreads. Square was pumping money into advertising this game. Also, copies were hard to come by because they couldn't bet that heavily on the 32 meg cartridge. So it's there's all these kind of competing perspectives, and telling all those different perspectives, I think, is what is important, right? And so for me, Final Fantasy VIII, I have a very personal history with Final Fantasy VIII because in between Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VIII, I started dating my wife. So I was 16, started dating the woman who would become my wife. 17, they're like, Final Fantasy VIII. This one is the love one. We are gonna tell a love story, and it's gonna be so epic and real. And I'm like, wow, okay, like I'm here for it, Square. Like I've seen what you've done. You've done some really moving relationship stuff. I can't wait to see it. And I spent all of Final Fantasy VIII going, come the fuck on. Just are you kidding me? You can't say I love, you can't say I love. Like I know I'm gonna marry this girl, which I didn't know, but I kind of, you know what I mean? Like, and you can't even admit that you like her in front of her after you like save the world together and time together. You know, like what even is this? Come on.
Whatever.
Thank you. You know, but at the same time, you know, I go back and play it and you go, whoa, the jump in visual and even storytelling from 7 to 8. They're so much better at this with the graphics and the sound and everything. It's so much more composed. At like 6 sequences in Final Fantasy VIII put the cloud pulls in on a train and the train stops and you're playing the game sequence to shame. They tied the CGI and the gameplay stuff together like so much more smoothly.
Yeah, the transitions were gorgeous.
Stunning. And then you go and then look at 9. And then you go, now you're taking it to that stylized thing, right? Where you go, now we're not just trying to go for realism or go for that. We are going for like a fully coherent artistic style. And that's fantastic and stylized, and it pulls it off. And so, you know, for me, like being able to go back and go, let's look at all these different perspectives. Because I still think I'm right about Final Fantasy VIII. I still think it's a shitty love story, you know, but there are people that go to bat for it. Because like, well, this fits with me because I was like a broken teen I had my shitty parents and, you know, we didn't have support. And like, there was this kid that, you know, we just kept bumping around each other and never able to admit it. Okay, well, that's a good perspective to have. Your story should be the perspective. My story should also be part of this perspective, I think. And, you know, you talk about digital eclipse and preservation. I hate to say it, but Game Informer, EGM, the physical magazines, we almost have it easy. With Video Game History Foundation and Internet Archive, there are now websites, you know, that Aidan and I have written for that are offline now. There's work we got paid good money to do that you cannot find without the Internet Archive, the Wayback Machine.
Yeah.
Or I've got like a crap ass PDF with no graphics somewhere. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of that needs to be done from the early age of digital media critique as well.
Speaking of Final Fantasy IX, I have the strategy guide. You know, the one bolstered by Play Online.
It's just useless. I have it all.
Somebody recreated the Final Fantasy IX Play Online strategy guide. So you're not totally, but it kind of beggars that a fan needed to go and recreate this experience because there was that very strange period where people didn't know how to juggle print and like online digital media. And so like Play Online trying to make money for Square, and they kind of totally botched all of that. And how do you preserve that?
Thinking on video game magazines and whatever else, I'm a video game physical collector. I'm a preservationist. I qualify myself as an AirSats video game librarian. Collecting the context and collecting the pieces as best as I can in a small New York City apartment is important to me. I also recognize the fact that even in that idea of like physical forever and, you know, having the magazines gives us so much context, these are as ephemeral as anything else. That friend that I mentioned that had the huge magazine collection, he gave most of it to me when he left his home and started living on his own, because I was basically the farm upstate to take all of your old video game stuff. I would keep it as best as I could. And through a lot of moves and a lot of things like that, I don't have most of those anymore. I have a 3-ring binder with sheet protectors that I cut out some of my favorite mini guides and articles and comics from some of those. And I'm very happy I have those. Like, it's the best way for me to get fever mode and Jammer Lammy, let me tell you. But the fact is, those disappear just as much, if differently, than early internet. And early internet can be preserved and can be restored by fans, but can disappear just as much. Reviews that we put out on an Instagram reel is going to be gone in 24 hours. But we try to save it. What is the best way and who's got it worst is a question for forever. We've even talked about the fact that magazine review days, you could talk about sales figures. Aidan, you mentioned getting Assassin's Creed Shadows, being like, that's going to go on my shelf. I'm happy I have it for when I'm ready. And then, oh, I need to play this. We live in an age where hours logged are also important. I remember the article about Elden Ring, like, oh my God, people have completed the game and now all of the play hours have like dropped. Yeah, if this were a game as service game, that might actually be some news. But that's just the way games are, and other people are going to play it. And you know what? Gaming sin. I haven't played Elden Ring yet. I'm gonna. But I haven't contributed to the hundreds, thousands, whatever hours of game time logs that also probably goes into the success metrics beyond the Metacritic, beyond all of these things that are all imperfect. And yet by measuring the data, you change the outcome.
Yeah, I've heard on plenty of shows that I love damning the concurrence nonsense on Steam. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything.
But if you check it, you give it meaning, and it's stupid.
Yeah, I mean, and that's part of it. We did a whole episode on game value versus game time, right? That to me, Before Your Eyes, an hour and a half long experience is one of the best video games ever made because of what I got from it, not how long it is. But like people yelling about Baldur's Gate 3 versus Spider-Man 2, the amount of time you can spend in the game, the world, the hours, what's better. The reviewer is choosing where to focus the value, and a trusted source will use facts to bring themselves to a conclusion of what they think and what they recommend. But when we're looking at stuff like concurrence or what games sold more, these things can matter. Right? A game of service game, of course concurrence matter. For Marvel Rivals, that's an important number for that game's longevity. But for Elden Ring, it was irrelevant. Although then, again, Elden Ring is sort of marketed as a awkward multiplayer game as well, and that's a whole other thing. What I love about what I see of the future of games, and it speaks to a lot of what both you, Aidan, and Ty have said, is like, it seems like the best of us are learning from these experiences and reviewing these reviews and understanding where it came from. And that connection is vital, because if we don't do that, then we're just going to fall into the same trappings that they fell into back in 1996.
Yeah. I think like one bit of context too is that while you were talking, I bought Before Your Eyes for my PlayStation because you sold me on it, right? Like,
yes,
I trust you.
It's so good.
And it's on sale and I just bought it.
You have the camera, right? For the PlayStation?
I don't. Do I need a camera? I have something I can hook up though. I've got lots of stuff.
Okay.
It doesn't even matter because like even if I can experiment with it or I trust you, there's also the level of just wanting to support interesting games, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But we also have access to so many games now, right? Like the average person, thanks to stuff like Game Pass or PlayStation Plus, like Steam sales,
Indies,
like I don't know,
yeah.
like you, Matt, and Geoff and Ty, but like my Steam library has 600 games and I've played 30 of them. Right?
Sounds about right.
You know, my Switch has like 120 games on it because I pick them up when there's $6 on the eShop.
That's how I get physical games. I got over 1,400 of them. I haven't played all of them.
Exactly. And we have access, like the average person nowadays probably has access to as many games at any given time as like a reviewer in the mid 90s. Right?
Right.
And so how do you write criticism for people that can just go out and play stuff? Nobody needs to know if Blueprints is worth buying because everybody has PlayStation Plus or Game Pass or, you know, the game will be on sale. It's like accessible, right? There's not that barrier. You're not trying to make a decision if your one game until your birthday in 6 months is worth it. I think the idea of like buyer's guide style, like consumer report style reviews where it's like, hey, is this game worth your money? Is far less interesting or useful now to many people than something that looks at a video game contextually within games history or games culture or what it's trying to do that's interesting. Like the whole Blueprints situation here, like everybody is trying to describe what Blueprints is in a way that like encapsulates it as a whole. But the thing about Blueprints is you can't describe it in a review. You have to experience playing it to really understand how it's melding and merging so many ideas. It's not an experience you can just summarize. Journey before destination. How do you do that? How do you review that? How do you write a capsule review of that? I want people to look at the best critics from other mediums. Look at Pauline Kael and how she wrote reviews and criticism, right? Write about video games as pieces of culture and art, not as consumer products. And I think that to me is where the most interesting path forward is.
The reason I played 1,000 times Resist last year is because of that. What you just described with Blueprints. Every time someone talked about that game, it was like, well, I can't really say. We did a whole episode about games that you can't talk, like Before Your Eyes is one of those games. It's an hour and a half long. I won't talk about the plot. You can. Absolutely, you can. You can review it. But the point of that game, it's so short. Just experience it. I remember I was watching a Jacob Geller video, and he was talking about a bunch of different games, and one of them was the Beginner's Guide, which I hadn't played at the time. And he went, it's an hour and a half long or 2 hours long, whatever it was. Go play it. And so I paused his video, went on Steam, bought it, played it, and then went back to the video. And it was absolutely worth it.
I did the same thing for the SideQuest episode that we have about the Beginner's Guide.
I love that, Aidan, and I can't agree more. I think it's one of the best things about modern reviews and modern game culture is that recommendation engine and that personalization. You can't explain 1,000 times Resist or the Beginner's Guide in a review or Stanley Parable without giving up the ghost. And I think that's the fun of it. There's also fun to reading that kind of review. I've read several reviews on Blueprints, and watching people dance around the what of the what is really entertaining and made me go from having too many games on my plates, I can't play this game, to, well, I guess I can ask for a code. I mean, if they give it, maybe we can interview the devs, but you rationalize why to play that game, sure. Even with South of Midnight, which I wanted to play, and then I read a friend of mine who wrote a review, who's a person of color, who lives in the South, about how great of an experience it is in telling a story that isn't told often, made me want to play it even more. That kind of stuff, I think, is the evolution of game reviews now that we just didn't have back then. I mean, the thing... I don't remember the exact quote, but in the Chrono Trigger episode, you talk about one of the reviewers saying, like, the only thing better than this game would be, like, a pile of cheerleaders or something. Yeah. And it's like...
diving nose first into a pool of cheerleaders.
And it's like you read that and go, yeah, all right. Well, that's bad.
In that Chrono Trigger review, you had the main reviewer, Geoff Lundergren, and he's the one that said it's like, the only thing better is a pile of cheerleaders. And then you had the second opinion, who I think it was Chris Slate, and he compared it to a wet dream. And like that was the sort of the level of discourse. It was like, how can we make, people excited about this game? We'll compare it to these two things.
You can't control your boners in math class, but you can control this game.
Yes, there you go. I would love critics to go back and read a lot of Roger Ebert. He wrote in mainstream places. He was on TV. He wrote for a newspaper, but he's one of the finest critics we've ever had. Again, you were talking about Klepek and how you don't agree with Klepek a lot of the time, but you respect him. I disagreed with Roger Ebert on honestly everything. Like he and I had such different tastes and ideas about things, but I think he's one of the best mainstream critics we've had in any field ever in terms of communicating complex ideas in a broad and accessible manner that makes you understand film better than you did before you read the review, whether you've seen the movie or not. And then you watch the movie and you go back to his review and you understand that review even better. And that's the type of criticism I want. I want something that makes people think and understand what video games can be.
I'm going to die if I don't name check Gita Jackson right now. They understand what they are doing so well. The NYU critical theory degree comes through, and especially when their social account is so much just shit posting constantly, then you look at their actual critical work and it's like, oh my God, at the depth of cultural understanding that they bring to the work is so cool and so vital.
That is a deep mind that goes a mile a minute and needs to have both of those outlets. And that is also an excellent avenue for where personality forward criticism goes.
I do want to give credit where credit's due. The South of Midnight review I was referring to was on But Why Though, and it was by Kate Sanchez, who's a friend of mine and an incredible writer. And I just want to make sure, if we're dropping names, that I give her the credit for her.
That's the review that sold me on it too. I thought it looked like a cool, action-y game. And then that was the review I read. And I was like, wow, this is something more.
I wanted to throw a question about how do we tell the audience that buyer's guide style reviews is not worth it to them, right? Because this is something, and I hate to hate on the Digital Foundry folks because I think the work that they do is so interesting in a vacuum, but I think it's so toxic and corrosive to train people to think about games that way, because now we get this I didn't get my 120 frames a second at 4K, so I didn't get my money's worth. And it's like, okay, well, who gives a shit? What does it matter what the FPS counter, turn the FPS counter off. Does it look good? Is the game fun? Don't be like, well, I'll tell you if I'm having a good time when Digital Foundry tells me whether I'm getting my frames. It's like what is that? I hate that so much.
I want there to be a game built around that. Like, give the people that are trying to get 120 frames per second, give them a game where it is nothing but menus. It is nothing but settings to play with. Because you try and tell me there is not a voracious subset of gamers that would descend upon this, that would have obsession over. You would be a liar, and I would call you out as such. Like, that is not a game for everybody, but we just throw that at them. We just throw it to them. Go, follow it. You're free now. Maybe we'll be fine. Maybe that's how we do it.
What if the game is emulation and you have to get Quake up to 24 frames per second on, and you can switch between your card that doesn't support OpenGL and your non-Intel
We finally
processor.
released Can It Run Crysis, the game.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yes.
As someone who replayed Crysis recently, and as someone who is not the biggest military shooter fan, I do like first-person shooters. That game is bad. The first stage is bad. It's too hard. The aiming sucks.
It was
my opinion.
absolutely there to test benchmarks. There's so much of it that, like, whatever it started as, it became that, and it is that. And
Yeah.
I would love to, there again, go back to old reviews and old articles and get a better sense of the view on it. But I think even within the development team, it got a little bit of like, well, we've got to maintain this because of this. No matter how in or out of the primary source you are, you can't help but get caught by the tide. All we can do is try to take the little shattered fragments of what everybody says and try to make the best disco ball we can.
Also, to just comment on what Ty said, I think that brings up a good point that sometimes the enemy isn't the reviewer, it's the audience. And I'm not saying the audience is the broad, but
But they can be.
Well, for an example, I'll punch it FromSoft because they can take it. FromSoft should have accessibility options, difficulty, whatever. FromSoft hasn't said anything that pisses me off about that because they've explained their ethos or whatever. It's the fans who become obnoxious, right? It'll ruin my game or whatever. The reason, and not to say all Dark Souls fans are like this, but there are fans in that community who are like, oh, if you put an easy mode, I'll choose it. Well, that's not on them. Don't pick it. There are these things that I think with benchmarks and graphics, there's an expectation and an entitlement within the game's public, within games media, in all sorts of sources. And it's navigating the bad actors, of which the social media has elevated and made much louder. When Aidan said he bought Shadows because they dogged on Elon Musk, which, as they should and hopefully continue to do.
Positive reinforcement.
Right. I think that there's this idea that there's a certain kind of straight white man that feel entitled in the game space, that they are getting pushed out more and more, and they are pushing back.
One thing that I think is really important to recognize too is that like the democratization of like presence that social media has created gives a perception that there are a lot of people out there like that, because the ones that get angriest utilize the tools to become the loudest. It's the book bans in the States or in Florida or something. You look at, there's all those news articles about how like nationally it's like a handful of people pushing forward like 90% of book bans, and we have these tools that allow these small groups to become powerful sources within culture, and that can be used to lift people up, and that can be used for very great grassroots movements, but it can also be manipulated in bad ways. And I don't think we should necessarily, like I'm Digital Foundry pilled. I love their content. It's changed the way that I look at video games. It makes me frustrated when I notice things about video games that I didn't used to. But at the same time, like one of my favorite games of the year so far is this game called Mika and the Witch's Mountain. It's like Kiki's Delivery Service mixed with like Alba. You play a little witch. She falls down off this big mountain, and then her goal is to get to the top of the mountain, but her broom's broken. So you go around the island delivering packages to the residents. Really simple, but it's just like this beautiful game. It's this cute little island, cute little people, cute little quests.
Oh, this is adorable.
It runs like shit. It's so broken. Like achievements just like pop up out of nowhere. Like every time I would boot the game, I would get like 7 achievements for things I had not accomplished. It's not good, but it does run at 60 and it feels okay to fly around. And so like you look past a bunch of the other stuff because it's like this game is just charming. It's nice to spend time here. It doesn't really matter that it doesn't have the level of polish we come to expect from AAA games. And I think that that's okay too, is recognizing that like when it comes to Assassin's Creed Shadows, I want that thing to push my PlayStation. right? I want Assassin's Creed Shadows to make me wish I had a PlayStation Pro, but I don't care if Eternal Strands, which I loved earlier this year,
Same.
or,
Absolutely.
you know, Blueprints or Mika and the Witch's Mountain don't get the most out of my hardware. The intended experience of those games is so different. And I think when you have chasing photorealism as a main goal for your art style and your game, like something like Shadows, like you're going to need more juice out of the system to make people believe, because you hit that uncanny valley so much sooner. In something like Mika and the Witch's Mountain, I don't notice when it's not running smoothly or it's glitching out or I can see through walls, because it's cartoony and it's fun and it's silly and it's achieving its goals despite that. If those same things start happening in Assassin's Creed Shadows, that rips you out of the world.
And it's execution based as well.
It's execution
I
based.
would imagine something for Mika, oh, it's a little weird, but it doesn't affect how you deal with how you play the game, versus something in Assassin's Creed, you're like, almost, glitch, god damn it. Or precision platformer where it just keeps sending you back, you know, you get stuck in the spikes.
In variables, frame rate can really mess you up. I think we can't say earlier in the episode that like subjectivity is important and there's no objective way to like look at or think about or review games, and then say like Digital Foundry wanting to focus on like tech performance is bad. I think it comes back to, I think it was Matt, you were saying it's not necessarily that these types of criticism exist, it's how the audience perceives them, but more to the point, weaponizes them.
And I want to be clear, like I said, I think give me a Digital Foundry video. It's entertaining and interesting as anything out there. You know, I love to.
It's useful knowledge.
It's useful and it's interesting, and it's for the sickos in the same way that I will watch a video about anything that is for the sickos, right? The problem is the audience. And that's where I was driving at, is that when that lens gets turned on everything and go, well, this is bad because it doesn't meet this. That's when I go, hey, whoa, can we time out?
I think too that the problem is also that the tools exist to create that direct connection between creators and their fans.
True.
And that in turn creates this sense of like obligation that like developers or creators or whoever owe something to their fans. And when there's that one-to-one connection, it's so easy to like connect directly with somebody who made your favorite game. That's going to catalyze the worst people who don't understand how to be bummed about something without being angry about something. So much of that is stoked, I think, by modern outrage culture and the tools that we exist within and the environments that we existed within now. Especially people who are writing criticism or making content online, making podcasts, writing game reviews. Like we all have to live in these systems that then enable access from, you know, like people who don't have good intentions. People were angry back when the PlayStation came out. Magazines, they'd publish a review of Yoshi's Island and it would get a 76. And I'd be like, well, that's fucking bullshit. So I'd write my letter to the editor saying like, that's fucking bullshit. You guys are totally wrong. I'm going to flush your cat down the toilet. And then I write that letter and then I probably cool off. Or I go, hey, Mom, I need an envelope to send this letter. She says, yeah, sure. Can I see the letter? And then she reads it and goes, you can't send this. And so that buffer room is so important and it just doesn't exist anymore. That instant gratification gives us those instant feelings and we expect those instant feelings now. And that can be good and that can be bad. Something like Digital Foundry, I don't think there's anything wrong with their content, but the fact that somebody can watch a Digital Foundry video and they can say whatever about Pokemon, and then immediately somebody can, like, while they're watching the video, send nasty messages to somebody who worked on Pokemon. Like, that's just a broken communication ecosystem. And we need to address that as a society, like at large, before we can really move forward from, I think, anything that's going on and going wrong in the West right now.
These are the burdens of a free press, I guess. And as you've mentioned, as we've all been mentioning, it is these are the shadows that the light casts, where this is also the same market that allows for fast and easy distribution of games and games criticism. Whether or not that's necessarily a good thing or a bad thing is up for debate. As much as I am very physical forward, I argue for good because of a lot of the good, smaller experiences that have come of it. But those also play in the same pond with the same sort of angry people.
Well, it's the double-edged sword of like the Mass Effect 3 changes and the outrage and the death threats to make that game change. It's one of my favorite trilogies of all time, some of my favorite games of all time. Has the problems, not the correct reaction and then course correction, right? But on the other hand, we have the Sonic movie, which I love, and had that original version of Sonic gone to air, it probably might not have gotten the audience it did. And I love those stupid movies. They're ridiculous. They're great. But even still, when that outrage happened and they went back to the drawing board and came back, you are pissing on the work of someone who worked really hard and thought that Sonic design was really great. You're absolutely right. I think it's this entitlement that because we can react immediately, we do react immediately. It goes back to the brand as characters thing. The reason I love Among Us is part and parcel because of Victoria Tran's very hard work building up that incredible social media presence, and now is a team of folks working for them, and they still put out incredible stuff. They just put out a video for their Yakuza content of like the karaoke song that Kiryu sings, but as one of the Among Us beans. They are a great team and smart, and I want to support it, but there's still that gray area of like, well, brands is people, though. They're not people. I think why I love the work that you two are doing with this podcast is because you are not attacking this as these guys were dumb. They didn't know what they were doing. This is stupid. It is very much the, we love this. We did this. We do this. Let's look at it. To me, like there's a PBS vibe to it in the sense that you guys genuinely are coming at this from a place of love while cracking jokes and making fun, but you are coming from it with a place of love and enjoyment and genuine intellectual curiosity to educate the audience while having some fun along the way. And I think it's the best way we can look at this past because there's so much of it that is piles of cheerleaders and talking about wet dreams that is gross, but there's some great stuff in there that's worth knowing for sure.
I almost compare it to, there's been a lot of indie games that I've noticed over the last few years that have kind of looked at games of our youth, games of the NES era that were, you know, well remembered, but a little quirky or thought of as bad games. But they looked and went, you know what, there's some good stuff here. Let's polish it. You know, remember that game? We made a lawyer-friendly version that's better. The idea of looking to what came before and not just writing it off, but going, what's worth keeping? What's worth learning from, good and bad, and moving forward. And this is part of that too. The work you do is part of that.
A big part of this is growth, but also just being entertaining, right? Like these were, you know, entertainment was so important to these magazines and then to the podcasts that I went through my 20s listening to. And trying to bring that into the creation of FunFactor is really important to me. When we first started like sending feelers out about the show, I got a few people came back who went, oh, that's going to be a hard sell. That's like some real inside baseball stuff. Only people who made magazines are going to want to read about or listen about magazines. And I was like, yeah, but I think you'll be surprised. Because I think you can look at these stories, you can look at these magazines in a way that is modern and talks about what modern video game culture is. And I think that's exactly what we've kind of hit on and why people seem to have been enjoying these first two episodes and why we're so excited to get back into the recording studio to continue to make these episodes. Because it's fun, because reading these magazines was fun, because playing video games is fun. Importantly, video games have always been about community.
I can't think of a better quick wrap up of what we do this for and why we do it and what we love about it. Other than to say, we've been doing this for 2 hours with you guys. We did this for an hour with Mike Drucker a few hours before that. And I could easily go another couple hours. I am having so much fun and we keep having fun every time we sit down, every time we do prep, every time we post, and every time we see people's reactions and people sharing it. It's just such an affirmation and it feels incredible. And I thank you guys both for saying such kind words.
They're truth and they come from the heart. Thank you guys for being here, for bringing the enthusiasm, for even more talking about it as you go back to talk about it more. I tried to land this plane an hour ago just to be polite, but the fact that we're still going, I'm not mad.
Oh, please. It's the formula that never breaks. When you bring more podcasters on a podcast, it balloons the runtime. Before we go, I would love for you guys to promote the show, tell folks where they can find it, and where they can find you online if you wish to be found.
Yeah, funfactorpod.com for everything that has all the free feeds. It also has, we're with Memberful if you subscribe, and we actually have the widgets right there. We've got quarterly and annual subscriptions. You get bonus episodes, ad-free episodes, access to the members only channel of our Discord, and all the socials are on there as well. So funfactorpod.com. We're at FunFactorPod everywhere. Follow, subscribe, shout us out, help spread the word because we love doing it. We want to keep doing it.
Visit the website just to see how it's designed and how it's laid out. The layout on this is, if it's anywhere near your nostalgia, you're going to have feelings you forgot about going to that website. And that looks like the intention, and I'm glad it was.
100%. 100%.
Thank you both so much for joining us. This was a delight. I, too, could go for another 2 hours, probably to the dismay of my spouse, so we won't do that. That said, I really do enjoy this time, and we will definitely have you back. I mean, now I've got to get Ty to do a side quest since Aidan's got one in the works. It's just a requirement now.
Yeah.
Definitely check out FunFactor. I've listened to both episodes. I've been an advocate since before it came out, and I will continue to be. Also, if you see writing from either of these two, please read it. Check out Aidan's books. If you want a great interview with Aidan about his books soon enough, you can go to Still Loading. There's a great episode. Also, Aidan did a great episode on Chrono Trigger over on Still Loading that I loved and was jealous of because I couldn't talk to them. I could only listen. Definitely go check all of that out. It gets the fun and game stamp of approval 100%.
And so now we put it to you, listeners. Do you read old video game magazines? Are you in on listening to FunFactor already? Are you going to listen to it after this discussion that we've had here? What games were you swayed into buying because of reviews? What reviews have you gone back to and realized, oh my God, what was the take going on here? Have you written any reviews that you want us to read? Let us know. Reach out to us. There's so many great ways to get in touch. We are Fun and Games Pod across all social media upon which we are active, which as of this episode is Blue Sky, Instagram, and Tumblr. You can email us at funandgamespod@gmail.com. Let us know what you thought of this episode, what you thought of previous episodes, who you'd like us to talk with, and what you'd like us to talk about in future episodes. Also a great place to send us those reviews that I mentioned before. If you are interested in talking about a game you love and why you love it as part of our side quest series, that's the best way to get in touch with us. Matt will get back to you through that email. You can visit certainpov.com and find not only other fantastic Certain POV podcasts, but a permanent invite link to our Discord server where a lot of the episode topics discussions start, where they continue, where people talk about a lot of the games that we've completed and the games that we're excited about in the future. A great way to support us and to get a one-stop shop of all of the things that Matt and I are working on is our Patreon, patreon.com/funandgamespod. There is a free tier, so you do not have to give any money to participate in the polls that we do for our console retrospectives or to check out most of the content that we put out there. But we do appreciate all of the support that our patrons give us, and we'd like to shout out those on the high scoreboard. Today, the high scoreboard is Alex Lavelle, Case Aiken, Daniel Nyden, Alejandro Alves, Chris Copleen, Curly Bright, Film It Yourself, Patrick Edwards, Rob Tremarco, Robert Prine, Sean Bowen, and Wes Bates. Thank you so much for your support. Please enter your initials. The controls are really nice. There's a bit of smoothness to it. There's a little bit of a momentum push to it. The graphics are a little flashy, but you do always know where you are. Unfortunately, the format is in Dvorak, so it's a 3 out of 10.
Also, a great way you can support us and FunFactor is by going to your podcast platform of choice and rating and reviewing it. And they have said on their own show, they'll read your reviews if they are entertaining or interesting enough. So you should review the reviewers who are reviewing. Also, some housekeeping. Geoff and I are going to be at PAX East. It is in May this year, and we're so excited to be going, covering it again for the podcast. We've already got 2 appointments, which is insane to say.
As of today.
But if you want to see us in person, we'll be there. And of course, we will do our usual dev interviews and have a wrap-up podcast as well. So if you're in the area and want to come say hi, please do. Please rate, review, subscribe on your podcatcher of choice because it helps all podcasters at any level. And it's so easy to do for free.
Whether you go and start listening to FunFactor's backlog immediately after this episode, whether you are chatting with us on social media, whether you are rating, reviewing, or if this is your very first episode of Fun and Games, thank you so much for being here. We couldn't do this without you. This is a conversation. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I am Matt A.K. Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.
Hey.
Oh, hey, Geoff.
What's going on, guys?
Oh, talking about Superman.
Oh, cool. I could talk about Superman.
I could talk some more about Superman.
We know.
I'll bet a few people would want to get in on this.
I'm down.
You know it.
That sounds like fun. I'll do it.
Cool, let's do it. We can call the show Men of Steel.
And you can find it at certainpov.com.
Or wherever you get your podcasts.
Yay.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.